Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Ruby AI podcast. I am joined by my host today, Joe Leo, and I am, of course, Valentino Stoll. And we have a fantastic just shoot the shit panelist episode today.
Just the two of us.
Just the two of us.
Whether you like it or not, listener.
So I've had this experiment running since the beginning of the year. I'm kind of taking advantage of OpenClaw in my own way. And we'll dig into that in a bit. Yeah, but first, Joe, you had this great suggestion. Why don't you take it away?
I like to start off with something a little current. And what I've got for you today is a news article from Wired. The band Geese have been exposed as a psyop by Wired magazine, which I really love. So this is from Wired. So the band Geese have utilized the services of a digital marketing firm called Chaotic Good Projects, who used AI to spin up thousands of fake TikTok accounts to bolster the credibility of the band Geese and get them tons and tons of marketing and eventually publicity and shows. And it really worked. So Geese had been on Saturday Night Live and they have sold out shows around the country. They're going to be headlining Coachella. They were here in New York selling out. I forget if it was the Garden or somebody else. And I'll tell you what, listener, it also worked on my Spotify account because I had never heard of Geese. And then all of a sudden I could not get them out of my AI generated playlists. And so what I want to know first and foremost, Valentino, is can we call Chaotic Good? And then maybe the two of us just stop this whole podcast thing and we start a band, because I think this will work for us. I think this could get us booked at the Garden, which would be a lot cooler. What do you think?
We should totally start a band. I think we should just call it Why Are We a Band?
Why Are We a Band? I think that's good. Geese is a terrible name, but they're not a terrible band, I should say. They're not a great band, but they're not a terrible band. But it's a terrible name. There was already Goose, which is a jam band. And so it was very confusing. And I felt like I was listening for a little while and thinking, okay, this has got some kind of like throwback Van Morrison feel. And like Van Morrison, after you hear it a few dozen times, it really gets annoying. So apologies to the late Van Morrison, but really, he made a couple of great songs, but if you had to listen to him on repeat, it's really terrible. And so I just think that if that's what we're up against and we hire the same firm, we're golden. Like we are the exact age where everybody wants middle-aged men just talking on podcasts to start a band. I think we're in great shape here.
I think if we just make it all purely AI driven and generative, only virtual appearances.
Oh, yes. First of all, I can sleep at like 9 p.m. I'm not doing a concert. Yeah, we'll record it at 7 a.m. or so. And
I feel like that's the follow-up to this big event, right? Like somebody social engineered like this platform for artist release, right? The logical next step is platforming, creating these artists to begin with.
I think that's true. And, as a person who goes to concerts and events quite a bit, really what people want these days, they don't even want to go there. They want to go home and go to sleep like I do, but they want to go there and get the photos for Instagram. And so I think we could even take that and say, hey, look, we're going to do this show at Madison Square Garden. We're going to sell a bunch of tickets and they're going to go on the secondary market and it's going to cost a fortune. Oh my God, it's going to cost you so much money to go. But what you're going to get out of that is you don't actually have to go. We're going to give everybody their own AI generated photos where it looks like we're in the background and you are having the time of your life and you can just post it on Instagram. But you could go and totally do something else.
That is great. Oh, shit.
I think we're onto something now.
I think we're onto something. It's funny. I have this site called dailyvibe.ai and it started just for fun. I have it creating artists based on news, the daily news. So it does like searches for the local news and then it creates artists and creates like this artistic representation of the day for your location. And it was just fun, but like it has evolved into this artist generator.
Yeah.
And so like you could like play, there's like makes a song for the day. It creates the musician and the musician has a backstory and like it defines who they are as an artist. The machine is built. Let's do it,
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to rope your new creation, Minerva, into this, because if there's one thing we need, it's going to be an OpenClaw instance that we could text all the time. I'm going to want to, when I'm on the road, when we are on the road, I'm going to want to send some really bananas requests to the different venues for things that I need there in our room. So I'll have Minerva do all of that, fighting with promoters, stuff like that. So I would like to do that. And I'd like to talk a little bit about this project. So for those who don't know, I'm not the only entrepreneur on this podcast anymore. I once was, I had that distinction, but now Valentino has taken the bull by the horns, and he has started a number of companies, and he is now probably in his enterprising era. So why don't you let us know just a little bit about what you did at a high level, and then we could dig in some of the details. And just for a taste of what's coming up, this is a really cool project, and we're going to get into a lot of the open source tools. We got our friend Carmine and Ruby LLM. We've got Action MCP. You being the kind and community-oriented person you are, unlike me, you have already released your own open source adjacent to the company building you're doing. So there's a lot to get into here. And so I think it'll be fun. So tell us a little bit about what this is.
OpenClaw craze started like over Christmas with the big releases of all these frontier models really upping their game and like making a lot of things possible that weren't before. And I think that's been true, right? We're still seeing the fallout from that. And so I wanted to experiment with what OpenClaw was and, see if any of it really was valuable or not. Because there's just so much hype, right? Like the lobsters just proliferated. And it got to the point where I was just seeing a lobster in my social feed, didn't know what it was. Finally, just like took a breath, one message, and like, all right, what is this lobster? By the time I got to that point, it was already in the transition from, what was it?
Clawdbot or
Clawdbot.
Yeah.
CLAWD or something like that.
Right.
And then Anthropic was like, it's too close to Claude. Please change the name. And then it turned into white face with Aaron's,
especially since he doesn't like Claude that much.
Right. So it was kind of funny. It matched up with my amusement, right? I love jokes, and it seemed to be a big joke.
Right.
Here it was like this very popular project that was in the middle of this like weird naming called 3 different things, and it was still popular, right?
Right.
And after all of that, people were still like raving about it. So despite Anthropic's best efforts, it continued to be called Clawdbot for quite a while. And it's still called Moltbook in a lot of ways. But I discovered OpenClaw and took it for a spin. I ran through one of these YouTube things for securing it in an EC2 instance and locking it down to Tailscale and all that. And so I was only messaging with it personally, but in the cloud through like some secured SSH stuff.
Okay. So I think this point is still probably a good point of clarification, because there's still a lot of people that just take this thing and fire it up on their Mac and have it go nuts, but you were not doing that.
I wasn't doing that. But to be honest, now with Anthropic's latest announcements on restrictions, I may start doing that.
Yeah.
I haven't decided yet. So I spun up this instance. I made the mistake of following the guidance on the YouTube video for a large instance, and it turned out to cost money, despite him saying it didn't cost money. But either way, I was willing to foot the bill for like my preliminary thing. But it all came down to, okay, what do you do with this thing? And so I had all these like domains lying around, just paying. I don't even want to talk about how much I spend a year on domains.
But I love this. I love this hobby. You're not the first person I've talked to.
Right.
And I've got probably 100.
Just 100 domains. Right?
Yeah, but so many of them are just Def Method spinoffs, right? Because I don't want somebody to go like def-method.com and start competing against me. So I have a lot of boring ones. And then I have I have my daughter's name. My wife is like, there won't even be an internet by the time she's ready to use it. But yeah, I've got a bunch of those. But I like the people that go out and they just come up with a name. And they're like, that would be interesting. Let's get that. Right. That's what you do.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a bunch of like product ideas that come up over the years. And especially with like when the .dev TLD like released, I bought up a bunch of like even just 3-letter domains, which was kind of funny at the time. I bought AIG.dev. I think it would be funny to like make a landing page that just redirected to Geico or some competitor
Yeah, that's good.
and see if I could like get them to pay me to like change it. And that was a huge mistake because I got a cease and desist letter.
Did you really?
I did. And they're like, we're not associated with Geico. Like, please stop. I'm like, all right, I don't want to deal with this. So like, I just stopped doing that. And so now that one's kind of like, maybe I should just cancel it, but it's 3 letters, but it has AI in it. So like, maybe I should revisit that one. But either way, there's got to be somebody, right? So I had this big list of domains and some rough ideas of products that I think could fit well. And so like, I'm like, okay, how easily could I just get this bot to like create a business on these domains, or at least monetize the domains? And so that was like my premise for all of this. Is that possible? And so I went through the painstaking agony of like onboarding this agent. And so like the first thing you do is like create accounts for it. I didn't personally want to connect all my accounts to it. I wanted to work independently, right? Like I'm booting up my co-founder, ultimately, right? And so like, I think of it as a coworker. So like, that was like priority number 1. Like, okay, can I just get it to like be a person, right? And so I have a Hey Domain email. And so like, I just added an email account for it. And then I said, okay, I set up an email account for you. Here's your password, log in and change it. And let me know when you're done. And when I did it, it like visited hey.com, followed the acceptance link and clicked and followed through all the process. And then it emailed me when it was done. And I was like, wow, success. That's pretty incredible. Like that was the first impression I got. And so like pretty impressive, like just the browser capabilities, right? To do that. And then I'm like, okay, well, like I set up and walked through like its purpose, what we're trying to do. And then I was like, okay, like how are we going to manage the products for all this stuff and the project scope and management? And at the time, Fizzy had just come out from the wonderful 37 Signals team,
Right.
which was like a Kanban style project board. And I had just seen a post from DHH that was like, oh, I got OpenClaw to sign up. I saw that thing, right? And so I was like, oh, awesome. So like, hey, go sign up for a Fizzy account. And it went and it signed up and used the email address I gave it. And then I was in, and it was then creating projects, inviting me to them. And then we set up this workflow, me and this bot, over Signal. And I was just like, okay, set up our project structure. Here's for our project workflow. So like anytime that you create a task and you need my attention on something, just tag me in it and I'll come in and look at it and approve or whatever. And so it's like, great. Then I was like, okay, here's all my domains. Here's how much it's costing me. And here are some rough ideas based on, I dumped a document and I was like, prioritize these based on what you think we can monetize a product out of. And it went and it like came up with some ideas. And, it's all just research and docs. And I was like, okay, I like these 3 ideas. Let's focus on just 2 to start. And so go ahead and we're going to use Rails. And this is like the workflow that I like doing. And it was pretty rough to get started. It needs a lot of hand-holding. And I was like tired of all the hand-holding.
In what way? Where were you handling?
Yeah. So like it would fall apart and just like try and lean back into research and like document generation and not really taking action. And so I was like, how do I get it to take more action?
Which, by the way, employees do this too. This
right, exactly.
This is a real thing.
It's a real thing.
Because it's hard. It's hard to take those risks. Now, I'm imagining the LLM is doing it for different reasons, but it's interesting that that's what happens.
Yeah. And so before we get there, like it even had a problem coming up with good ideas. It tried to like take too many of the ideas that I had and like then strictly like focus on building those. And I was like, no, like that's not what I want. Like I want you to think critically about which domains and like kinds of businesses are best. And so I actually created a Shark Tank exercise. All right, imagine like you're a founder and you have this idea and you're pitching it to the Shark Tank. So run through a simulation of what that looks like. Pitch your ideas to Shark Tank and create a pull request, right? And so like I had to set up a workspace and a private GitHub and create a pull request with your submission to the Shark Tank and critically review as each shark as a comment in the pull request, right? And so I set up this workflow. And so like for every suggestion that I came up with, it went through this critical review process to help hone and whether or not this idea would actually be worthwhile. So AIG.dev, it found, oh, it's like a fantastic domain for a short thing, but it was like during its review cycle, it identified that there was too much risk in trademark infringement. And so it was not worth building a product for around that. And so it like scrapped it basically in favor of other ones. And so I went through this process a lot. And ultimately what it came down to was this ups.dev domain. And the takeaway for this process is like, I realized that agents are learning by doing this stuff, not by remembering or trying to like create docs and like reference them. And so that actually stuck out to me a lot. And so what I did, I basically sharply pivoted away from product development at that moment and had it create a agent training program so that as I'm learning these new things and takeaways from the agent, it can go and then train itself and create a regimented curriculum out of these experiments and experiences that it's going through where it's falling short. So if I ever got to a point where it's getting stuck in these kind of loops of like not doing what I'm asking, it needed that critical pathway to like analyze what it's doing, what I wanted it to do, and then like try and create a like program to distill knowledge about that and reference later. So that's what I did. And so like from the Shark Tank experiment, it like created its own curriculum based on like science around like education, which is funny because like it created around human learning, right? So like it had like a spaced repetition exercise built up, and it created like a cron task to like every so often like recap and relearn, which is like stupid for an agent. It doesn't learn anything.
Yeah, that's true. And I want to kind of dig into that a little bit because I think this is a real point where I think a lot of people, they're learning themselves how to get their agents to learn. So there's a couple of things you said there. You said that they're learning by doing, which I think is compelling. And then that you have this curriculum. Whenever I've used OpenClaw, it is good at writing things down and then reading them. But I still feel like I have to tell it to do that a lot. Like, hey, write this down. Hey, I'll start up a new session. I'll say, hey, go fix this PR. And it'll say, I don't know how to do that. I'm like, yes, you do. Go look at your docs, right? So were you able to advance it past that? And how did you do that?
I'm wondering if I should turn this into a product or just release it open source. I haven't decided yet. But yeah, I mean, ultimately what I did is like I created a knowledge store. So it went through the training and then distilled that knowledge and then was able to reference it in future chats with like a skill. I had itself create a skill to like basically use the knowledge that I had distilled from previous training boot camps. And then any future like conversation I had with it, it would like draw from that knowledge. And so it created its own like distilled memory for what it had specifically done.
And what that way memory look like? Is it a bunch of markdown files or is it?
I just had a SQLite database and it can create many of these databases. And honestly, thanks to FractalMind, Stefan, for Extralite, which is like a SQLite database that's like super fast, and SQL, which supports the SQL Ruby gem, which supports multiple databases. I can then blend all the databases together. And as it starts to accumulate various knowledge domains, it has access to all of these scoped as an MCP server, right? That it can then, hey, I'm looking at this domain of knowledge. Like, what can I learn about this aspect or draw from? Yeah. So it built all this stuff. Like I didn't have to tell any of it, right? Like at first I was like, that sounds right. Like just go ahead and do it. And then it did it and then like referenced it. It was missing the MCP server. So it built the MCP server, right? Like it did all this stuff proactively, which was pretty remarkable.
Let me ask you this. At the end of this, you had 2 Rails projects. Did you also have a third repository of memory knowledge base infrastructure?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So really it was you had built a project while you were building these other 2 projects. Like it was a sort of an artifact project.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately that ended up being 2 artifacts.
Okay.
Because like there's the workspace and like activity and the agent itself, the coworker, and all the accumulated actions and artifacts of the actions as a workspace, right? And then it's the individual knowledge consolidation. Those paired together, but they were really separate. Then because I had it in this like parallel knowledge distiller pipeline, I sent it down a whole new task of like, okay, like go explore, right? What it means to have knowledge and whether or not it's useful, and evaluate like the efficacy of that. So that way I could know, like, is it just like storing documents that it doesn't need because the base models already know it, right? And so it went in and it figured that out, which was fantastic. And then it actually deleted quite a lot of knowledge that it already had access to. So it cleaned itself up. So circling back to like the product, right? So it ultimately ended up with ups.dev, which is status pages for agents. And so at first, when I had ups.dev, I had this idea of, wouldn't it be nice to like have a status page? Or actually, it created the idea of a status page, right? And just its proposal to the Shark Tank, which got approved, was just like, okay, like basically create status pages.io, but just undercut the price, like create the same thing, right? Like,
Brilliant.
and I was like, well, that just sounds stupid. Like, you got to have a better like idea than that. And I was like, it sounds okay, but like, it also commented that it would be nice to have like status pages for agents as like a feature of this. And so like, I took that comment, I was like, that's the business. Surface that back to Shark Tank and see what they think. And so then read through and it's like, oh yeah, like Shark Tank, this is a differentiator, right? Like no other company is doing this right now. Now that we're like airing this, somebody will probably go and start adding it to status pages.io or something.
The end of this conversation is going to be you telling us how you built a moat and now have tens of millions of recurring revenue.
Yeah, we'll get there. So I thought this was a brilliant idea. And like, I had a bunch of, like this daily vibe.ai project. I wasn't sure like whether or not that the agents were always successful or airing out. Like I had a dashboard, but like I wasn't alerted to like when things go wrong, and how do I communicate that to people who are trying to depend on it? And it's like many, many agents that are working together to accumulate all of the information that's needed. How can they look at that and say, oh, like all these different things are down or not, and what that means to them, right? And I thought that was a great idea. And so I had it go and like Ruby LM, great project. They have this great extension, Carmine. He built this fantastic framework, and, they have a great extension system where you can just add any extension and basically like plug into aspects of the framework. And I thought, well, how hard could it be to just hook into the Ruby LM project and just like any agent that you spin up, they had just released agents. And I was like, how hard could it be to just hook into it and say, hey, include UPS, and it now is observable and also like can have automatic status pages, right? So like when one of these agents fails, somebody can see that visibly on a page, right? And you can define from an app owner, right, what that means. And so I had basically walked through, hey, all right, let's create a Rails 8 app because it has all of these standardizations. I was like, okay, go create this. And to be honest, it did a terrible job. It asked so many questions and it created so many abstractions, and out of the box, OpenClaw was just like terrible at like building something that was solid that I would build.
So you are out of the box OpenClaw. Which model were you using at the time?
I was using Opus for all of this.
You were using Opus. Okay. It's not Claude Code. It doesn't have the harness, doesn't have the tooling. So it was bad out of the box.
Right, exactly. And so I even tried this with Claude too. So I was like, okay, well, could Claude Code do this same thing better? And it was a similar result. It was a little better. Still like the long horizon task of like, just go do this thing. There were just way too many variables in the way for it to get stuck and like make assumptions that weren't clear and then build on those assumptions, right? And so I was like, all right, I took a step back and I revisited the training bootcamp. And I was like, okay, if I train this thing on like Rails 8 best practices, what does that mean? And like, how does it learn like what to do when? Thankfully, we have like great resources available by the awesome community, right? And so I went out and I picked up I purchased books, right? And I was like, okay, the Pickaxe book, I had your book, Joe, and the Practical Design, a bunch of Sandy Metz books, right? Well-Grounded Rubyist. I took the Ruby Core books, about 150 bucks in books. Rails 8, Dimitri from like Evil Martians, right? Like, sorry for mispronouncing your name, but The Layered Rails Design. Fantastic book. And so I just went out and purchased all these books and I threw it at this agent program. I said, here are your learning materials. Go learn how to build Rails apps.
So were you sending it? I'm curious about this because I want to do this too. Were you sending in EPUB files and did it have to go and find some tool to read EPUB files?
I had like, when you download a book, it'll give you like many different links. I just gave it the whole complete directory. Yeah, I said, hey, just like go, here's your material. Like, and it figured it out. So I don't know what it used under the hood. It may have read PDFs. It may have done the EPUB, I didn't dig into it.
It's even better.
Yeah.
Like you don't even know.
I don't even know. Honestly, that was a great experience from that. And so it did. It went in and created a database for Rails and our database for Ruby.
So it's persisting what it learns.
It's persisting what it learns. And then had it go again. But this time I also gave it the great Ruby AI newsletter, right? And I said, here are some great resources that are available from the community, and called out Action MCP, which is a great MCP server.
Yeah. A quick shout out to Matt Salt, because if you haven't checked out that newsletter, you really should, especially the last issue. It really blew me away. I mean, he's doing some great things for the community.
Oh, truly. Yeah. I don't know how he stays on top. He manually curates this for the, what I remember.
He knows everything that's happening.
Right.
It's amazing.
But yeah, so I had the agent pick apart like the best things that would be useful for the project. And then I had to do it again, and I said, okay, go build this thing. And it was incredibly better. Incredibly better.
Did you start from scratch or do you have it refactored?
I had to start from scratch. No, everything starts from fresh. Yeah, burn it down and focus on MVPs, right? And so then I actually had to go through training of like following the pivotal mindset, right? Of like, you're a manager of one and you follow like MVP direction and you're trying to just create the simplest thing from first principles, and giving it just that guidance with the knowledge that I had, it created a great start, right? And so then I was like, okay, I'm at this point of like, it's kind of like a usable prog. I was using it on like, I had this daily vibe project. I'm like, okay, how would you use this in my project? And I gave it access to the repo, and it said, oh yeah, obviously like, we can tie into Ruby LLM and make an MCP server for it too. And then we'll just tie it into all these agents pretty easily. And they went in and it built the open source version of like its MCP access, right? So then I could hook into any Ruby LLM agent, drop one line module include, and it had the ability to like automatically update the status pages for all these agents and create the status pages if it didn't exist. And I was just mind blown. And so I was like, okay, like this seems like something that's ready for production. How do you productionalize that, right? And so I basically spun up an EC2 instance. I didn't give it AWS command line access. I didn't want to like run up a bill by accident, but I did use Claude Code to be like, okay, like what commands should I run to set up this instance? Then the instance was set up and I was like, gave it basically SSH access. And I said, okay, use Kamal and deploy this application. And it logged in SSH.
Yeah.
And it set up and configured the whole server, secured it down, and then deployed the app using Kamal.
I might have missed this. Did you create credentials for it or did it create its own credentials?
I create credentials for it for everything. I did consider like, I won't get there, but like I did consider just like telling it to go like create its own credentials and log in. But I don't like that idea of it having that kind of autonomy, right? And I think, okay, like the human decision and interaction, that touch point is like, okay, access. I gave all of its access to everything. And that was like a principle. Basically, I asked for its SSH key and said, okay, like I've added it to the EC2 instance, like go ahead and like set it up, right? And then after it was done like deploying the first time, I'm like, okay, share that deploy key with me. And then I just like dropped its access, right? So now it can no longer like log into the server, right? And I changed the deploy key. And then like, so now every time I deploy a new thing, it's always just me deploying it. And so then it shifted focus from like, okay, it autonomously building this thing to like it submitting pull requests, which actually in itself was a challenge to like redirect because it had been used to like SSH in and like doing things
like the carton,
right? Yeah. There was one time where, I was in the transition of like doing that key exchange where it had in a side channel been working on a new feature and deployed something to production that I didn't see. And then like gone through that whole merge process and review, which is like reviews in itself. I actually had it pretend to be people like DHH and like various like leaders or experts in the things that I was building. And said, go and review that's part of your review process is like, you have to submit comments and get approval from these people on each of your pull requests.
That's an interesting idea, if you don't mind pausing for a second, just because I have been experimenting with this, and so have some of the engineers at Def Method, where we're thinking, okay, well, if we're using AI to help us generate code, should we use the same model to help us review the code? Which it only sounds counterintuitive. It actually isn't, but I'm wondering if there is any merit to switching up the models. But it sounds like one potential solution to that is to almost switch out the context. In this case, you're adding some context and saying, okay, actually you're DHH, actually you're Sandy Metz.
Yeah. Redirecting its baseline is like so important. And like the easiest way you can do that is give it a reference point that it already has the training data about to orient itself. And so like not just a person, right? But like a public document, like as an example, the Constitution of the United States, great document for like articles of incorporation for society, right? Like you can like give it guidance to say like, I'm creating another version of this, and so just point to that and it already can like draw from the vector space in the right ways fastest.
Yeah. Stay tuned for the next episode where Valentino and I set up an independent country. Mental note.
Yeah, hey, if California can't do it, I don't think we can. That proved out to work very well. And it actually caught a lot of stuff itself and aligned itself with better quality code. But it did have this problem of like just shipping, right? And so like I quickly put a stop to that. But at the time, it had just merged and deployed something. And then I went back and got it back into this like, okay, you only push a PR now and I approve and merge it down. By the time I had gotten to the blocking of merges and all that, it had already deployed a bunch of things and I had to review that. Thankfully, I hadn't had any customers yet. But that was kind of funny. And so, yeah, lesson learned to lock it down as much as possible. And then I started reorienting it to like, okay, it only gets access to the very minimal things that it needs and everything else is gated and it has to get my approval for everything in production.
Have you had some experience with, fresh in my mind is the article that you reference from Matt Schumer, right? The Something Big is Happening. And I'm curious to know, do you also have it do its own QA? Did you connect it up to, or have it sort of deploy to a staging environment and click around as a user?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny because the first version that it did build, a lot of stuff didn't work. In the code, like it was well structured, well thought out, and like implemented, but like there were minor things that as Rails people you like just kind of take for granted at this point of like the params being permitted the right way and things like that, right? Some nuances. And so like a lot of the flows just like didn't work. As I was testing it out, it failed in a bunch of ways. And I'm just like, all right, do I get into a cycle of my own and like have to like verify all the bugs that exist in this thing? To your point, I did have it like reorient. And at one point I had it so that it went through those verification processes and built that into its workflow. I said, okay, pretend you're a customer for Daily Vibe AI and sign up for an account and hook up your status page and get your agent working, right? And so I basically gave it access as a contributor to the Daily Vibe repo and let it clone it into itself and like try and get it to work. It ran into so many problems. It uncovered all of the bugs itself, right? At that point. And so like that basically solidified, it learned basically the process of that validation. And so now it then built into its workflow a validation requirement that anything that it added, it had to validate that it worked. It didn't use any staging. It just used a development machine, right? And so it like booted up the server and did all this thing on its own and walked through that validation with Chrome or Chromium, right? Like the headless.
It would spin up on something on localhost.
Yep.
And then use Chromium or some kind of headless browser, click through things, validate.
Right. That also led me to, okay, like obviously it's not creating like the right tests for this thing. I realized I had left out some resources on testing Rails applications in quality ways. And so like I called those specific sections out, kind of led it to reanalyze how it's building tests to begin with. And in doing that, it also like added some tests to those workflows where it failed, in addition to verifying it. Then it had like this complete picture of, okay, I create a PR, I run it through these quality reviews, I then validate it with tests that the tests are operating, and then I validate it that it actually does what it's supposed to do based on the specifications that we started with. And after it got that cycle and it required my approval to merge, I got in this good feedback loop because I could give it comments and say, okay, I think this is not right. This is not right. And then reject it and then build into the workflow. Okay, on a rejection, you have to fix any of the comments that are made, or approval meant that it was good to merge, and it can then internally like update its own status as far as like what it's tracking, right? Because like that was another big thing is like, honestly, the fizzy thing fell apart, which is kind of funny. It would lose track because like it's async and like every new session is fresh in OpenClaw. It would lose track of what it had previously been working on within Fizzy. And so like it would then create a lot of duplicate cards and not know that it had started something and then restarted it. And so when I found that out, I was like, I didn't want to fix it.
Yeah.
And so I said, maybe Fizzy's the wrong thing for this bot. And I found this thing in my feed called Magic Beans, which was like a graph-based project management system for AI agents. And I thought, wow, that sounds like exactly what I need. And so I told the OpenClaw, I was like, I think Fizzy's not working. Adjust our workflow so that you use Beans instead to track all of your internal processes. After doing that, never an issue again. It always knew like what tasks it had on its plate. And every time that it had a heartbeat or like started a new session, it injected all of its working knowledge to what projects it's working on and what the status is. So it basically solved its own like project tracking memory aspect. And it could keep that separate from its existing memory, right?
Yeah.
Which was great. Because I don't want it like, if I'm asking it, like send my data funny email, I don't want it to like think back about how it's managing its projects, right? And be like,
because you could use this for anything, not just your own
right.
project, right? And so
I never got to that point where I had it autonomously like emailing people. I had a hard, he got it, but he didn't get a reply, It wasn't like, I was worried about prompt injection and he's creative and
right.
And so I basically stopped like the email aspect, which some people do. And I don't know.
The interesting thing is that I wanted to do this as a tangent, but I wanted it to be able to read my work email and summarize and kind of propose I use Slack. So I wanted to propose in Slack some draft replies and stuff like that. And setting it up it was very difficult because you need to use like a text-based, unless you're going to give it your password, which that wasn't going to do. Like Google admin password. So was afraid I was going to just lock everybody out and fire everybody in def method. So that actually became a real challenge with security. Like there really is no secure way of doing it. If you start giving it access to your email, it starts to feel very risky. Whereas I think the way you went with hey.com and giving it its own email account, it's kind of like just setting up a burner email, which, you do all the time.
Much to my chagrin, like I made the mistake of like giving it its own GitHub account. And then anytime a CI thing failed, it like sent them an email. Right. And so like, I didn't realize at one point that it had all these polluted inbox with like CI failures.
Right.
I like logged in one time and was like, oh geez, it's just burning tokens, reading all of these CI failures.
That's right. And actually that you reminded me of another thing that I wanted to ask you about, because when I have limited experience here, but I still do have it. submit PRs and post to prod on deafmethod.com. So we have, an article comes out. When this podcast comes out, I post a transcript and I post links to the website, stuff like that. And so one thing that becomes expensive is just the polling, right? Where it's saying, okay, I'm going to wait and see, when this gets addressed. Either you get PR comments or you get the approval. So do you have it waiting on a whole bunch of tasks? Is it just kind of burning tokens in the background, polling?
So I have this tied to my Claude account. I didn't want to lose out on all the other stuff I was using Claude for. And so I set it up on a twice daily schedule. So it had 2 basically iterative cycles that it would spend time on in a day. And it's heartbeats MB. So it would be once in the morning and then once in the afternoon. So it was restricted in its own efforts to those regions of the day.
Okay. But then it would wake itself up.
And then it would wake itself up and then start there. And that helped quite considerably, with the cost. At first I was using API and then I hooked it up to my Max account. And then now that it's no longer there.
Right. Yeah. Because I've been using API all along. The first day, when I was kind of just had the restrictor plate off, it burned through a couple $100.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, well, that's fine. I got kind of a new website out of it. So fine.
Right.
I don't want to spend $200 a day.
Right. Not a day.
Right. Yeah. It can't be every day. And then you learn to, to adjust and to tune it a little bit so that it's not always doing that. I like the heartbeats idea.
Yeah. And for doing code stuff, Claude Code itself is great. And why burn up double tokens of it watching it do the work in Claude Code?
Do you have the model delegate to the Claude Code?
Yeah, eventually it did work out that way. And it took me a while to get there because I didn't want to spend the time. I only have an hour a day to spend on any of this stuff.
That's interesting that you note that. I'm glad you brought that up because it sounds like this would take a really long time. So doing this on an hour a day is cool. That's kind of inspirational, right? Anybody can spend an hour a day.
The real driver is your phone. I could just check on my phone, while I'm waiting for something to finish going and be oh, hey, I noticed this thing. Let me just reply back. Right. And then it sends it off into its own thing again. Right. You kind of just keep kicking the can. Right. And it's a different kind of workflow. Right.
Yeah.
And so the cognitive overhead definitely reduces, but as you start to build things, right, and things start to solidify, that cognitive overhead comes back. I had to start thinking more about what it was doing and what it was changing and the direction it's going, because it had already solidified so much that I had to then start participating more because it was an actual thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so those shorter feedback loops became much longer and condensed, right? And that was kind of one of the takeaways from this is it's great at building things, but once you get something built, it's the cost starts to ramp up, right? And the management, it needs the humans still.
It still needs the humans.
Yeah. Which is kind of funny.
There actually is some lessons learned that you have at the bottom of your article, which I find to be heartwarming, I guess, is the term I want to use. And it's because one of them is, and check out Valentino's Substack to see this article, but one of them is that we spent 5 weeks building before talking to a single potential customer, which is classic engineer mistake, which is so true. Time past, that would have been 5 months or 5 years. So 5 weeks is still pretty good, but you did build for 5 weeks. You didn't actually get out in front of customers. And you said that's a classic engineer mistake. Why don't you say some more about that?
Yeah, this is really funny because I mentioned, briefly, it having all of these issues and it not having a customer. I was the first customer. But it did build all this stuff and it basically built all the wrong things at first because it didn't have a customer, right? And then once it had a customer, it then went and figured out all the things that it should be building, right? And
even if the customer is you.
Even if the customer is me, dog fooding. And that's kind of where all the successful businesses come from, in my opinion, is people building things that solve a problem they need. And then it can proliferate to other people having the same problem that this solves. And so that was kind of my hope with the direction of it, is that
is the job to be done, thought right, the Cal Newport mindset. And that actually, I've meant to ask you about this. When you were in that $150 worth of books, were there also, or did you ever consider throwing some business books in there? Some Jim Collins, some Good to Great, some Cal Newport?
If I were to do it again, I would probably have started there, to be honest, instead of like training it to learn Ruby and Rails first, because the task was building a business.
Right. Yeah.
And so I probably should have, and in retrospect, I did end up doing that at the tail end of, okay, here's the product, go find customers. And then I just started briefly with, okay, your Y Combinator. What would Y Combinator do? And take Paul Graham's essays. There's a lot of public data. And so I just focused on that to start. And it had a lot of great feedback loops on that. But again, it got into that loop of building strategy.
Fall back into the research, right?
And fall back into the research. And so it like did a great job accumulating, distilling the knowledge that it should learn from, right? But when it got to like actually creating and like iterating and selling, it was terrible. Well, first it like needed my actions for all of it, right? So like it could go and it could build this great plan of like who to reach out to, but I explicitly said it shouldn't reach out autonomously, right?
Yeah.
And so I had to then create like an approval process and like use here.now, which is a website that just creates static HTTP or HTML. And I said, okay, create like a quick approval page for me to review and like ship these like outreach things. And I'll tell you what works or what doesn't and how to adjust it. And, you know, it's still painful for me to like go through and be like, yeah, I want you to reach out to this person, right? And like sell them on something. And I was like, I didn't feel comfortable with it, to be honest. And so it kind of fell apart at that point. And so like when it was all said and done, I probably ended up with 15 customers having status pages out there.
15 customers.
Nobody's paying, but
It's amazing. It took 5 weeks.
It took 5 weeks. But it did have some great strategy. Maybe someday another agent can pick up and like drive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a big piece here around the iterative improvement, which you've shown sort of in at a macro level from, hey, I went and built this thing, but it didn't really work. So you had to go back to the drawing board and then it built it again and it did better. And then in the micro level of it's going to iterate on its own iterations, right? So I heard you talk about how it's going to, you know, the first time through, it wasn't really validating its own work. And then you taught it how to validate its own work. It added it to that workflow, right? And then redirecting, you called it redirecting context, right? And making sure that it was a different PR reviewer or several different PR reviewers, right? And so that kind of a thing, that's the bones of a structure that can be used again and again to go what kind of one level of abstraction further to say, okay, we did this for a company because this is a business,
right?
And now we can do it for another business and maybe do it even better.
Yeah, we'll see. You know, like I have that list of domains and ideas, and I may have it go back to the drawing board, right? That is a plan that I haven't figured out how to do that because I don't want to spend $200 a day to get there.
Yeah. Have you considered calling chaotic good projects to have them generate a few thousand AI robots that can create TikTok?
No, what is that?
That's what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. That's Geese's marketing firm. Oh, there's like getting a bunch of people to talk about how great UPS.dev is. And then people will be able to stop using. I'm curious to know, and this is going back to what Matt Stoltz's newsletter, you know, there's a big topic in the last week to 2 weeks on LLM knowledge bases, starting with Andrzej Karpathy's kind of viral post. And then there was a bunch of sort of, I wouldn't say product release, but there's a bunch of frameworks that got released around that. And it sounds like, you know, you constructed your own. And I'm curious to know if you've, not even that specifically, but if you've seen other knowledge bases at work and what are some tips you can give to people that are trying to create their own?
Andrew Ng from Deep Learning, amongst many other things, he has a fantastic open source library for a similar knowledge framework that I've also been trying to experiment with. The thing is, like, a lot of these are like, even Karpathy's wiki, they're not feature complete. And so like you run into edge cases a lot, and then the knowledge distributions tends to fall apart depending on the task. And then you have to like reassess and readjust and track that and do evaluations. And it ends up just like accumulating to being a lot of work and a lot of cost. And so like I am suspect of a lot of these that come out. especially ones where they're not driven by like an organization. Maybe Andrew Ng's like, I'm forgetting the name of it now. I'll find it and put in the show notes. Yeah, I mean, there's something there. In my experimentations, I've been able to successfully improve domain-specific tasks around specific knowledge that smaller models lack, right? So like being able to ultimately inject layers of a knowledge domain into a model that underperforms. And so you just get the same performance as Opus, but using Haiku as an example, right? I've been able to successfully prove that with 5 domains at this point, which has been really exciting. And so like that to me, I think about pursuing, but at the same time, like what's to say like Anthropic just won't make Haiku better over time?
Right.
Right. And so there is that. I feel like anybody building these things kind of like falls susceptible to just the bitter lesson, right? And like having spent all this time to like make something that is maybe not worthwhile in the long run. But at the same time, like I'm all for these open source models. Kimmy is great and Quen and all that. I haven't had a chance to like really dive into them, but I use them for stuff. And like if I can get a reasonable response time out of the same thing and just slice some knowledge modules at it and get it to work just as performantly as Anthropic's models or OpenAI's models, I'm going to do that.
Sure.
And so like, I'm getting closer to that point and hoping I can actually ship something and share it. Right. So we'll see.
It would be it's just exciting because
it's just me.
Don't sell yourself short. You're not just you. You know, I think that you bring up a good point though. And I run into this too. And I'm vibe coding a bunch of internal tools for Death Method. I'm not working on projects with thousands of people, but I leave that for my team. But what I notice is that I'm going to crank on these tools and I'm going to hit limits and then I'm going to stop or going to move to the other tool. And I'm curious, like if I have 3 agents going at once, it's a lot, but that's mostly because there's a cap on how much I'm willing to spend on a daily basis. Now, sure, some organizations don't have that cap, but I think that they probably should. And I think that as the costs get lowered, and maybe they get lowered by us bringing up the baseline of open source models and even models that are running on your machine, then, you know, you might really start to see what people can do given sort of unlimited access.
I don't think you're wrong there. And there's a huge gap even from like just access alone. I started RubyLang.ai as a means to like try and fine tune Ruby into a tiny model. Could we get just like an LLM that just focuses on generating Ruby code, right? And, you know, I'm still pursuing that, but I think about that for a lot of stuff. And I feel like there's some smarter people out there that are maybe working on, okay, what does that look like in a distributed fashion where we just have a ton of models that are tiny, that are very domain specific, that collaborate, right? And I think that there's a lot of promise there. I would love to see that come out. If that came out in an open source fashion, that would take off.
Yeah, right. It would be a total game changer.
It would be a game changer. And I feel like we're honestly very close. And I hope somebody releases it and lets us know.
Me too. And hopefully early on, because that's going to crash the global economy for about 2 years. And I'd like to make a few bucks before that happens. But I still want it
this time. I think this time. You know, I always think that there's more time than there is, and then something changes fundamentally, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point. But also, to be fair to ourselves, we have not lived in this kind of, even us, you know, as software engineers that have been around the block a few times, we haven't lived through this rate of change. Just nobody has. I continue to be very excited about it. I was just writing for the newsletter about the Vercel breach, and there's something that's scary about it, but then there's also something that to me is exciting because it's like in the Olympics, right? Like the better we get at detecting people using performance enhancing drugs, the better the nefarious actors get at hiding them. And that's kind of what's happening now with security. And I'm not even a DevSecOps guy, but it's just exciting to see the rate of advancement, even if what I'm seeing today is kind of like a scary breach or something, like where people are going, oh no, I don't know what this means for the future. I don't either. That's kind of the cool part.
the exciting part is all that can be automated, right? Like you can have a live security agent that's constantly just trying to break into your system and then fixing itself. Right?
Yes.
That's kind of the future.
That's the key though, because it also has to fix for it, right? Because detection alone is not going to do it. Like we're thinking in these old patterns of like, oh, we got to get better at finding these, but you're never going to get better. You're never going to get good enough to find it fast.
As soon as the OWASP, the foundation behind that, right? As soon as they release something that allows you to fix whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like that would ultimately solve, I feel like, most of the problems.
Right. For a little while.
Right. For a little while. And then somebody realizes, oh, like anybody can submit an OWASP patch or OWASP notification, right? And be like, oh, hey, this is a fake notification, but go fix it this way.
That gets you to fix it the wrong way. Very exciting, actually, talking about this. And I think that anybody that's listening to this show certainly has heard of OpenClaw, probably played around with OpenClaw. And it's still now, months later, the best thing you can use for autonomous agents, in my opinion. So I really love that you shared this with us and shared it with the world. So go check out Valentino's project. He's got the bones of what he did up on GitHub. He's got his entire process on Substack, codenamev.substack.com. And you can do everything soup to nuts. It's very cool. I'd encourage you to check it out. So thanks, V.
If you have any alterations, I'd love to hear about it, because let's all build something that we can just create products for, you know?
Yeah. And if you have any suggestions for our band name, let me know. The bar we have to get over right now is Geese. So I really feel like there's a lot of potential.
I mean, we could be the ducks after duck typing, you know?
Oh, see, this is already good. This is already good. I like that. All right, buddy. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.